Okay, so it's been a little time since I last did a review of a Star Wars Black Series figure, and I've bought quite a few in recent months, so I'm seriously overdue a bit of a catch-up. So to start off with, I'm going to take a look at the Bib Fortuna. I must admit, this is one of my most anticipated figures in this line, simply because I've always really liked the character, the design of the character, and his very strange, creepy look. And that might sound odd considering he is just a subsidiary character, but as I said, I've always liked his look, and I've always thought the aliens of Star Wars were some of the most fun characters, especially to collect as toys. So as ever, let's start off by taking a look at the packaging. Well, we're all very familiar with Hasbro's Black Series packaging by now. As a rule, it is pretty bland. It is mostly just black space. We have the Star Wars logo. We do have a little bit of colour differentiating the different films. So in this case, Return of the Jedi obviously has that green banner, which is quite cool. And of course, it is mostly window display where we can see the figure in all his glory there. There's not much in the way of an inlay behind the figure to really make it pop, but it does the job. However, on the side panel, we do have this fantastic image here of the character. This is lovely illustrated artwork, and again we have that nice colour gradation there, which I think is really good. And if we put him next to other characters in the series, especially if we mix and match between the films, we can see a really nice contrast in the colours, but a fairly consistent art style throughout all of these figure releases, which is absolutely brilliant. When you stack these up on a shelf, they look really nice and presentable. And then the reverse of the packaging, we do have a slightly larger version of that image on the side panel, which is pretty cool. We have a little bit of bio about the character, and then not a lot else aside from a lot of small print. So, it's not the most dynamic packaging in the world, but it does the job. So, moving on to the figure himself once he's been liberated from his packaging, first impressions are that he does strike quite an imposing figure. He's definitely a little bit taller than some of the other figures in this line, and that gives him a little bit more gravitas and personality. I have to give the sculptors top marks when it comes to this head sculpt. I think they've done an absolute tremendous job. I think the sculpt itself is very, very accurate to what we see on screen, which is great, but I particularly like the paint wash that they've used over this figure. So rather than just keeping it as a matte white for those head tails and on the top of his head, they've actually given it a blue wash there, which just gives it a little bit more personality, a little bit more texture, and it makes all the difference. I also particularly like the way they've done the eyes in this figure. He's definitely caught that very creepy, slightly weird look to this character, and I think they've done a great job. Sadly, things start to fall apart when we actually look at the body of this figure though. The sculpting of the costume is perfectly fine, but there's just not an awful lot of detail when it comes to paint apps or washes to really make the most of this sculpt and make it look authentic, which is pretty disappointing. But to make matters worse, we have a personal bugbear of mine, this big, thick rubber cloak, which is seriously restrictive and really hinders the articulation. And he suffers particularly badly when it comes to the legs because there are multiple layers of this material, which isn't the most flexible or malleable, and is pretty difficult to deal with. I've also noticed that with mine, he's very difficult to stand freely. He has a tendency to fall over and lean to one side. As I mentioned, the articulation is massively compromised on this figure. He does have a ball joint in the head, but again, he's got those huge head tails which do prevent him from really getting the most out of this joint. He's okay turning from side to side, but he can't really bend forwards or backwards too much, and it ends up being more of a wobble than anything else. He does have ball joints in the shoulders, so in theory he should be able to kick his arms up and out, but again, as you can see from this big, thick, heavy cloak that he has, you're not really going to be able to get much out of the upper arms at all. He does have a pin swivel at the elbow though, which is fairly free and uncompromised, which is great. He can spin that all the way around and of course bend it to 90 degrees. Likewise, there's another pin swivel there at the wrist, which allows that wrist to rotate 360 degrees and hinge forwards and backwards as well. Now, in theory, he does have another ball joint in his torso, but good luck getting any use out of this, although he can be made to sort of lean left and right and bend forwards and backwards. Again, that cloak is just not really going to allow you to put him in any dynamic poses. When it comes to the legs, again, he's got those hinge hips. He can kick his legs out to the side. He can kind of kick them forwards, but not without great intervention. You're not really going to be able to get him to hold any poses because of all these skirts and cloaks and things. The articulation points are all there, you just can't get the use out of them. In terms of accessories, he does come with a handful of goodies, although I'm not entirely sure what these props are, but hey, I'm always glad to have extra world-building props with my figures. And thankfully, he has no problems holding them whatsoever. He's able to slide these into his grip through those elongated fingers very easily. They are pretty malleable to be able to hold and grasp pretty much any object you can want, really, and they're broad enough to be able to hold these quite chunky, mug-like objects with no problems. So all things considered, for me, this is a 3-star figure. As I said, he was highly anticipated. I really like this character. I have a lot of goodwill towards this action figure, and I do think they've done a tremendous job when it comes to the sculpting. Particularly that head sculpt is very, very nicely done, and the paint apps are excellent. But sadly, that's where the compliments really come to an end from me, because the rest of it is very problematic. I think particularly that very restrictive cloak and the material they've used for it just really hinders the articulation. As I said, mine has great difficulty standing freely. I'm definitely going to have to use a stand to pose this guy, and ultimately I don't think there's many poses you're really going to be able to put him in. Now, to be fair, when we look at the character in the film, he's not the most athletic character, he's not doing lots of action sequences, so I suppose it's fine to just have him standing in the background. But nevertheless, if you're someone who likes to put your characters in lots of different poses and create fantastic displays, then you're going to feel a little bit disappointed with this one. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.